Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in. My name's Carl, and I was one of the twins who participated in Stanford's groundbreaking study comparing a vegan and omnivorous diet in 22 pairs of identical twins. I was the twin assigned to the vegan diet, while my brother Fred was assigned to the omnivorous diet. We had a really great time participating in this study, and we feel honored to have played a role in the research that found that a vegan diet improves overall cardiovascular health. Just as exciting, this research was an inspiration behind the docuseries You Are What You Eat, a twin experiment on Netflix. And this series was a Netflix top 10 and inspired countless numbers of people to change their diets. And it's opened up critical conversations about how we can create better habits both for our own individual health and the health of our planet. Since the docuseries aired on January 1st, the researchers behind the twin study have received some really great questions about the work. And they're all here with me today to answer some of the most common and interesting or funny questions that they've received so far. I'll let them introduce themselves and what role they played in the study before we jump in. Christopher, how about you go first?
My name's Christopher Gardner. I'm a professor of medicine at Stanford University. I've been here 30 years. My background's nutrition. I have a PhD in nutrition science. I've been feeding and bleeding and now feeding, bleeding, and pooping people for decades. And it's super fun to do the study, and I'll popcorn over to co-first author Cate Ward. Dr. Ward.
I'm Cate. I'm a postdoc working with Christopher Gardner and Justin Sonnenberg at the Stanford Prevention Research Center. And my background is more molecular, so my PhD is in metabolic biology. Now I do a lot of human nutrition trials, also trained as a dietitian in between my PhD and research now. So that's kind of what I bring to the group.
I'm Matt Landry. I'm an assistant professor and registered dietitian at the University of California, Irvine. Before starting this position, I was a postdoc working with Christopher and Cate at Stanford.
The first question, I think, is for Christopher. So a lot of people seem like they were fascinated by just twins and the idea of identical twins in general. Can you tell us why you chose to study identical twins and what opportunities and challenges that are brought?
Yeah, I have to say I take zero credit for the idea. Really, what happened was the producer, Luis Hoyos, came to a development officer at Stanford and said, hey, we'd like to talk to some researchers about doing a study in it. Probably Gardner and Sonnenberg, because they do what we are interested in, diet and the microbiome. And they were the first ones who said, what would you think about using twins? And I thought, oh my God, I've done studies forever. That sounds super clever, but boy, what a pain in the butt to recruit twins. And they said, oh no, we have a whole bunch of twins lined up for this. And I thought, oh my God, this is so cool. In all our studies where we randomly assign people, part of the reason we randomly assign them is try to balance out who exercises more or less, sleeps better or worse, etc. We can never randomize for genes, like they all have their own genes. Oh my God, identical twins, that would be such a hook. I actually didn't realize how much of a hook it would be. I actually think that the success of the Netflix series was largely due to picking identical twins as the subjects. The design of the study itself is not rocket science. It's kind of what we always do. The identical twins was the twist, and they were so fun to work with. So great scientific idea and also a blast for our whole team.
Thank you. And so the DEXA scan, the arousal test, and the workouts with NIMI that the twins got to participate in the docuseries, I think that was very interesting for a lot of people. Did all the twins get to do those things, or is that sort of a unique thing just for the docuseries?
So I have to say, Carl, that part was a little frustrating for me. So when we were sort of negotiating how much does a study cost and how long would it run and what would you do, we really spent months trying to figure out if this whole thing was viable at all. And when we finally made some decisions and started moving forward, the production team kept having new ideas. How about we do this? How about we do another thing? And we said, well, no, we kind of already worked out the budget and we're already getting started here. That really won't fly. And so really what ended up happening was the producer and the production team did some things on the side without us. Now, I will say that we knew about the body composition scans with DEXA, which stands for dual energy X-ray absorptiometry. That part's really expensive. And we said, you know, we really can't do that. Go ahead and do that yourself. And they did. And so a lot of people have been writing me saying, hey, I've read your published paper. Where are the DEXA data? Please share those. And those will never be published. They were only done in 8 people. That's not a publishable kind of study, but that also came up for the sexual arousal pornography thing, which just made my eyes roll. I was thinking, oh my God, nobody even told us about that till we saw the dang thing released. Oh God, who's going to attribute that to us? That had nothing to do with us. So that was kind of a funny twist to the study, was there's actually a couple things that they didn't make clear were only done in the 4 pairs of twins that they were following. They couldn't follow all 22 pairs. That was just not feasible. So a couple things, they didn't make it clear that that's really only a subset. That's been a little interesting, but a little source of frustration for us who were collecting data for the real publishable study.
Of great results that were presented in both the docuseries and the study, but I noticed some typical measurements like weight and blood pressure measurements weren't shared. Why is that?
Yeah, so we had a ton of data, very hard to get all of that into one publication. We came up against the word count, obviously, and as you can tell by our supplementary data, which is quite dense. And so we try to split all of this data into the appropriate amount of publications based on the subject matter. And so a lot of the microbiome findings will be published by the Sonnenberg lab. There's a grad student in the Sonnenberg lab working on that right now. Kind of a cool approach where we start in humans typically in research. A lot of it is you start in mice and work your way up. We have all this human data. And so he's trying to really figure out the root of what we see in the microbiome data back in mice. So kind of a cool approach there. But the weight and blood pressure is another example of just wasn't enough space in this paper. Likely will go into a different publication, but tons of data that we're working with, really lucky to be in this position, but just splitting it into the appropriate publications and, releasing it as all the authors finish each publication.
And so for Christopher, it seems like there's been a lot of discussion and questions around calories. And could you explain why or why not the 2 arms of the study were calorie matched or controlled for calories or not?
Yeah, actually, this came up before the Netflix at all. This came up when we published the study back in November of 2023. And so people on social media got on my case and said, oh my God, this study was biased from the beginning. The whole thing is about weight loss. They fed the vegans less than they fed the omnivores. This is practically criminal. And I have a whole tutorial on this. I think there's 17 different posts tied together. And it's actually a pretty simple story. So when we started the study, we had a food delivery service. Trifecta was their name. And the dietitians worked with them and said, we want the omnivorous and the vegan diet to both be healthy. We want them to be matched on things and unmatched on other things. Like we want both of them to get a lot of veggies and grains. But the omnivores have to get like 30% of their calories from animal products. So this can be omnivore versus vegan. The calories for the delivered service were identical. And so what's confusing is we didn't publish the data on what we delivered to the participants. So part of any nutrition study is doing assessment of what the participants say they're eating. So what we published is what they said they ate. So we didn't deliver different calories, they ate different calories. So on the vegan diet, the vegans ate fewer calories. They did lose more weight than the omnivores, but that's not because we intentionally manipulated the calories and made that happen up front. There's probably at least a couple different explanations. And one would be a vegan diet full of fiber with a lot of sort of water-dense foods. Barbara Rolls has written a whole book on volumetrics, which has to sort of do with how much water is in your food and how big does it look. And you'll stop eating sooner if it's got more water or it looks like a big portion. You'll just slow down and be satiated sooner. That would be one reason. Another reason is vegan diets are more restrictive. So once they had a whole bunch of veggies and grains and beans, they might have been hungry for a piece of cheese or some yogurt, but they couldn't have that. So they probably weren't hungry for more beans and more veggies. So they might have been hungry for that, but they didn't eat because they could only eat vegan. So it's not one or the other. It's those two and maybe more. They were delivered the same number of calories. They ate a different number of calories, and that's an important thing to report and not a flaw in the study design.
That's interesting. Thank you. And so I think, Cate, in the same vein, can you explain why other nutrients such as fiber or protein were also not matched?
Yeah, I'll add on to what Christopher said. I remember when I started with the group, we were starting this trial, and I come from a background of doing dietary experiments in mice. And so I was very much questioning the dietary design, being, curious as to why we wouldn't, match protein grams, fiber grams. And I remember Christopher had such a great explanation that it was a behavioral intervention, not necessarily intervention of, okay, grams of protein is exactly matched. The intervention is telling this group to go onto a vegan diet, telling this group to go onto an omnivorous diet. You, like Christopher said, provide the same amount of calories, but the matching specific grams was not the intervention. And so that was something that was new to me at the time, but then once Christopher explained it, it clicked. And so, yeah, that's kind of how I like to convey it to people, that the intervention is the telling a group to go vegan, telling a group to continue eating this omnivorous diet. And with that is going to come variances in specific nutrients, protein and fiber are some, but, varies person to person.
Thank you. And so, Matt, can you talk a little bit more about study design and why you chose 22 pairs of identical twins in an 8-week time period? What factors influenced that? Was there specific statistical needs that had to be met, or?
Yeah, great question. So first, our sample size was really based on the availability of resources and funding rather than some formal power calculation. Now, statistically, the using identical twins may have reduced some issues about reproducibility because the twins could kind of act as their own controls. And the duration of the study was based on both available resources, but also our primary outcome, LDL cholesterol. And we've gotten some pushback that, oh, 8 weeks is too short of a study, but in several of our previous trials, we can observe clinically relevant changes in cardiovascular risk factors, things like LDL cholesterol, weight, all in 8 weeks or sometimes even less. In this study, we saw changes as early as 4 weeks into the intervention. And now with all that said, we didn't have a follow-up period, so that does limit our ability to say what's the long-term adherence or the maintenance of these cardiovascular risk factors. But that's where we rely on other epidemiological studies that have looked at vegan diets.
Thank you. And so when assembling the manuscript and the data for a big study like this, how do you decide, as was mentioned before, you have word limits. How do you decide which results to highlight in the manuscript, which data to put in the supplement? And then is there any data that was left out entirely?
Yeah. With all of our studies, we have so much cool stuff and we want to just tell everyone about it in so much detail. But a lot of the journals, the nutrition and medical journals, they really limit how much we can put in one single paper. And we love to both provide the results of the study and then also the information about the diet. So you can get a holistic picture of both what people were eating and then how that impacted their health. So we struggled with publishing all those things together. So some information did have to get pushed to the supplement. That doesn't mean it's any less important. We think it's critical in the interpretation of our results. But just as we mentioned earlier, some of the findings couldn't even fit in between the main manuscript and supplement. So they're going to be published in some separate kind of publications. So you can be on the lookout for that.
That's great. I'm looking forward to seeing what more comes of the study. And so I guess we can go to sort of a lightning round now. What's one question that each of you has gotten that you've been dying to answer but haven't had the chance yet?
Had a lot of interest in folks that have read our study or they've watched the docuseries and now they want to change their diet. And some of them want to go vegan and are curious, how do we do it? So my advice as a registered dietitian would be to start gradually. So going vegan doesn't have to happen overnight, and even just making small changes in your diet, going from animal to plant-based sources of food, can still have impacts on your health. And additionally, one of the exciting parts about this is trying out new recipes and exploring different flavors and things like that. And there's a variety of different plant-based recipes that all mimic really traditional dishes across a variety of different cuisines. And lastly, there's healthy and unhealthy ways to do every dietary pattern, no exception with vegan. I like to say that Oreos are still vegan. So the advice that we give our participants in our study is that when in doubt, go with the diet that's really high in vegetables, fruits, and whole grains, that limits processed foods and added sugars, and it's a win-win all around.
One of the interesting questions that I've been getting from the public has been the timing of the Netflix. Like, did you decide after the study to do that? Did it go alongside? And I mean, the whole Netflix thing was before we ever started the study. It had to, so it would be capturing everyone along the way. But a little funny point of this comes out when it comes to me making a comment about one of the more interesting findings, which was the biological clock, the epigenetic results. So in the beginning, I was quite skeptical that that would amount to anything. It ended up being statistically significant and something we may now add to all our studies. Also telomere length, which is the same kind of thing, getting at sort of your biological aging, not your chronological age. But as we were filming, no one ever caught me when I explained how skeptical I was. And as we got toward the end of the movie, they remembered, wait, weren't you really skeptical about this in the beginning? I said, yeah, I was. I'm totally impressed now. I love this. I said, well, in the beginning, you didn't have a beard. Now you have a beard since we started this like 2 years ago. Can you please shave your beard and say that again? I said, what? Why would I have to shave my beard? And they said, oh, for continuity. From a filming perspective, if you're going to say, oh, I wonder what will happen in the study, you can't have a beard one day and not the next. And so please shave. And I said, no, I'm not going to shave. So if anybody was watching, that was a fake shock when they recorded me saying what I had said a year and a half before. I said, yeah, I don't really think that biological clock thing is going to make much of a difference. And if you notice, I had a beard, but the previous intro comment that I made, I didn't. I thought that was a funny, part of filmmaking, looking for that continuity.
I will say, so I see patients through my private practice, and I've gotten a lot of questions from my own patients about going plant-based, kind of adding to what Matt said, but I will also add the other perspective. I used to work inpatient in the hospital as a dietitian, and there are some situations, where patients are really struggling to eat enough calories in general. Someone who is struggling with cancer treatment or struggling from an eating disorder, where these specific situations, it may not be very appropriate to restrict someone's diet. So yeah, for your average healthy individual, a lot of the individuals that are coming to us, it's great to incorporate more plant-based foods, but sometimes the context is not appropriate. So remembering, always work with your dietitian, your primary care provider to find out the most appropriate diet for you, because although we love to tout the benefits of a plant-based diet, it might not be appropriate for those really struggling with more severe illnesses and chronic diseases.
I've got another funny one, which is I got some feedback about scientific bias after we were finished, saying Christopher follows a whole food plant-based diet, close to a vegan diet. Probably isn't fair that he did this kind of study. And I'm kind of watching this grow on social media, and without even addressing it personally, thank you, Twitter universe. Somebody out there, or more than one person, came to my rescue and said, well, does that mean keto people can't do keto studies? So can you not do the type of study that is your personal diet? And as I was watching this dialogue going back and forth, I was tempted at one point to say, look, I understand the bias of vegans doing vegan studies or keto doing keto studies. So probably what we really should restrict this to is only people who don't eat at all should be running studies of these polarizing diet patterns. That was going to be my helpful social media comment, but I didn't do it. I thought I would share it now. I have one other very short story, which has to do with a slight inconsistency in the film. I'm going to guess a bunch of the outcomes that we studied might have been new to people. They didn't know what dual energy X-ray absorptiometry was. They didn't know what epigenetics were or biological clocks. So at the point in the movie when they're starting to describe the biological clocks and epigenetics, and they have Lucia Aronica on, in the background, the B-roll is the participants running on a treadmill. Like, what? Wait a sec. Epigenetics has nothing to do with running on a treadmill. Why is that the backdrop for talking about modifications to the expression of DNA? that was just sort of a face plant for me, thinking, okay, why is that the background? Why couldn't there be a little cartoon or something? So I thought that was a funny little disconnect in the film. Running on a treadmill has nothing to do with your epigenetics. Hopefully I cleared that up.
Well, great. Thank you all. This has been a really enlightening conversation. And I have to say that as an identical twin, I really enjoyed participating in this study, especially sort of getting the opportunity at the end to meet all the other identical twins. There was a unique experience to sort of see how there's lots of like shared experiences among identical twins that you always sort of picked up on yourself, but it was cool to see how sort of everyone has gone through the same thing, like being confused and getting sick of that and then getting over it eventually, and seeing how close all the twins were to. It was a really fun experience. So again, thank you for your time. And for those of you listening today, I hope you'll visit nutrition.stanford.edu for more information about the study.